I want to have a special thank you to all the folks in Jerusalem here, especially Eileen and some of those folks that helped put this all together and make it all come out. There's going to be an intermission after Dwayne Olson's presentation, and we're going to have cookies and lemonade out in the back that are free. And restroom across the road if anybody needs that. Roger Matheson is going to be the final presenter this afternoon. So with that, I think we'll get started. We'd like to move it along because it gets dark a little earlier on days like this. So yeah. Thanks again.
Welcome everybody. Before I get started reading here, just to kind of let you know where I fit into this tree here. My great-great-grandfather was Edward Olson, that Dwayne is going to wrote the piece on and is going to present today. So it's really an honor for me to be up here and do this. He was a founding member of this church, and to be here now is really special. One of his daughters married my great-grandfather, and they moved down to the Winchester area. And just to bring a little history there, that great-grandfather of mine, I brought his pocket watch. I was lucky enough to have that, and so still ticks and keeps time, and have that in my pocket as we go through today. So again, a really neat opportunity for me to do. I'll apologize up front if I butcher some of these names. If anybody in the audience is relatives of some of these folks, I apologize for that up front. But we'll get started. This congregation, the Scandinavian Evangelical Lutheran Church of Waukesha in Shawano County, was organized on November 25th, 1874, at the home of Anton Pedersen. The following composed the Board of Trustees elected at the time: Johannes Lund, Jacob Olson, and Peter Hansen, Secretary. Pastor E.J. Hami of Winchester presided at the meeting. Although organized in 1874, it was November 10th of 1875 before it was officially recorded. A little background on Pastor Hami. In 1854, a young lad of 11, Evan John Hami, emigrated to America with his parents, John and Carrie Hami, from Upper Telemarken, Norway. In America, he attended Luther College and the Concordia Seminary. He was ordained in 1864, and shortly thereafter moved to the Winchester area. It was from here that he traveled by horse and buggy, or wagon, and held religious services for the neighboring settlers, many Norwegians like himself. According to the Norwegian American Historical Association, Shawano County had a total population of 3,166 in 1870. Of this number, there were 30 families made up of 152 Norwegians, just in Shawano County. Pastor Hami had actually conducted his first service in the Shawano County Parish on December 7th of 1869. At that first service, there were 23 present. Of those present, 18 decided to form a congregation. The first service of this new congregation, according to the reports, was held at the home of Martinus and Bertha Anderson. It was the first Norwegian Lutheran service held in Shawano County. The next service was held on January 15th, 1870, in the Shawano Congregation Schoolhouse. Church members were so scattered, Pastor Hami promised to do 2 services on the same day to accommodate all members. Services had to be held for Navarino Jerusalem congregation and for the Waukesha New Jerusalem congregation. Pastor Hami died in 1903. In his lifetime, he accomplished a lot. After assisting with the formation of this congregation, he founded the city of Wittenberg in western Shawano County, where he established an orphan home, a home for the elderly, a printing establishment, and an academy and normal school. He edited a paper called The Old and Young, and edited Sunday school papers both in Norwegian and English. He also found time to publish several books. In his free time, Pastor Hami married Ingeborg Svenholt in 1869. Just for the record, if I ever told my wife that in my spare time I found time to marry her, I would not be standing here right now. But anyway, in his free time, he found time to get married, and together they raised 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. The Navarino and Waukesha congregations, or Jerusalem and New Jerusalem, here being the New Jerusalem, as listed in the early records, were formed by dividing the Shawano congregation. This occurred at the congregational meeting on October 22nd and 23rd of 1872. Charter members of this congregation were Christian Jacobson, Peter Peterson Sr., Brady Bredesen, Jacob Olson, John L. Olson, Edward Olson, Ivor Olson, John C. Olson, Peter Hansen, Jacob Larson, John Tally Lund, Olvis Olson, Hans Gibson, Anton Pedersen, Ed Matheson, Jens Larson, Johannes Lund, and Peter Peterson Jr. Before the New Jerusalem Church was built, neighbors would gather at various homes for services and scripture readings. Some of these homes were those of Johannes Lund, Olvis Olson, and Anton Pedersen. Their homes had 3 rooms which were considered very large at the time. These pioneers from Norway were a religious people. They valued their religion and their church. And among their most treasured possessions were the Bible, hymn book, and the Little Catechism, or a book of devotions. Jacob Larson usually led the services, and Miss Anton Pedersen led the singing. With plans for a church, land in the surrounding area was purchased and cleared. The dense forest yielded plenty of logs. In 1874, a church, 20 feet by 28 feet, of hand-cut and hand-hewn logs was built by the men of the congregation. Plaster was put between the logs, and later the logs were whitewashed to make the church lighter inside. The pine benches were unpainted but were scrubbed clean from time to time along with the pine floor. The ceiling was also made of pine, and this was grooved. The church had no steeple at the time or chancel. There was no pulpit, and an improvised lectern was made from a desk with a sloping top. The first constitution of the congregation was written in the Norwegian language, and all services were conducted in Norwegian. Pastor Hami left the congregation in 1875. It was then served by Pastor Paul Thorlaksson from Pulsifer. In 1877, he was granted permission to go to New Iceland for 6 months. He had been born in Iceland in 1849 and came to this country in 1872. Pastor G.H. Onlid from Green Valley served from about 1878 to 1882. Pastor J.N. Berg came in the fall of 1883. Due to ill health, he resigned in 1884. Pastor J.A. Ofstedel served from about 1884 to 1887. Reverend E.T. Sherpling succeeded him. Throughout the years, 2 men, together with the pastor, were elected to see the religious school was being held during the year. These men solicited the congregation, and members gave according to willingness and ability. Also, 2 men were elected to the annual meeting to collect for Samfunkassen. Jane? Perfect. All right, which means the general budget. The Ladies' Aid was organized in 1889 with 5 charter members. Mrs. Grethy Paulson, an early settler who had come to this area from Winneconne, Wisconsin, was instrumental in the organization. Having been a member of the Ladies' Aid Society in that vicinity, she related how much she missed that organization and suggested to her neighbor ladies that a similar organization be started in this congregation. So with the assistance of Pastor Schepling, this Jerusalem Lutheran Ladies' Aid of Lunds was organized at the home of Miss Trine Hansen. Charter members were Gertrude Paulson, Trine Hansen, Raquel Olson, Jacoby Pedersen, and Karen Larson. Mrs. Paulson and Mrs. Pedersen were sisters, as were Mrs. Olson and Mrs. Larson, while Mrs. Hansen was their sister-in-law. It was called Singforeningen, which means sewing society. And the meetings were conducted in the Norwegian language. Meetings were held twice a month. The women usually had to walk to attend these meetings. The oxen or horses normally used for transportation were with the men working in the fields. As the women walked through, more and more would join them, and there would be quite a few before they would reach their meeting place. A little true story. After one particularly severe winter storm, one of the women from the Ladies' Aid didn't want to miss the meeting. She put on skis, crossed a few fields, went through woods and over zigzag fences. She finally got to the meeting place and found that she was the only one that had made it. So after devotions and hymn singing, the afternoon was spent with spinning, knitting, sewing, and making quilts. Once completed, these were taken to town in exchange for materials such as gingham and calico. The material was used to make men's shirts or ladies' or children's aprons. All sewing was done by hand. Considerable amounts of money were made through the sale of these handmade items. In 1891, the church steeple and chancel were built by Ramus Paulson. Alexander Johnson assisted. The chancel was 15 feet by 16 feet. Paulson and Johnson also constructed the pulpit, altar, and ring. The baptismal font was built by Ramus. The window-high pulpit at the right front was attached to the wall, paneled, carved, and later trimmed with red velvet and fringed with gold, as was the altar ring. The church door proper opened into a small entrance hall, which had stairs leading to a small gallery. From the ceiling hung beautiful kerosene lamps in sets of 4 with frosted chimneys and fluted tops. There was a swinging bracket lamp besides the pulpit, as well as directly across from the chancel. The lamp in the chancel was a gift from the Jacob Moe family in about 1891. The lamp hanging in the nave, beautiful but not nearly as decorative, was purchased by the congregation on August 17, 1889 from the F.D. Neighbor of Shawano. The cost was $10.90. At the same time in 1891, the church was sided and painted white. The bell was purchased in 1895. It was ordered by Pastor Stripling from the Stuckey Bell Foundry Company, 1312 South 2nd Street, St. Louis, Missouri. The bill for the bell was $100.79. The bell is made of genuine bell metal, new ingot copper, and the best imported Indian block tin. Included in the price was the rope to ring and a toll and 1 monkey wrench. Being my background is accounting, when I'm done, I want to do a little inventory and see if we can find that monkey wrench somewhere around here, because it's got to be here. The bell was tone B and had an inscription, "My name is Mary." The church records in 1895 listed Ole Cornelius as janitor, and therefore his responsibilities were to ring the bell at sundown on special occasions, such as Christmas Eve, Easter, and Pentecost. Likewise, he was to ring the bell 1 hour before services, as well as when the service began. In 1896, 3 weeks of Norwegian school was held during the summer, 1½ weeks at the home of John L. Olson, and the other 1½ weeks at the Jacob Olson home. Gilbert Larson was the teacher. Pastor E. Schepling resigned in 1896. He later became a doctor in North Dakota and died in Fergus Falls, North Dakota in 1926 at age 65. Reverend J.P. Berge was installed as pastor by G.A. Soide in December of 1896. At the Anglican congregation meeting in 1897, it was decided that a stable was needed near the church where the minister's horses might be sheltered during services. The pastor had long, difficult trips to make in all kinds of weather, traveling 20 miles with horse and buggy or cutter over poor roads and deep snow. It was not unusual to get out and tramp or shovel the road so horses could get through. The snow was not plowed off the road, but had to be shoveled by hand. People walked for miles to attend the services. Others arrived in lumber wagons or top buggies. Horses were tied near the church. During cold weather, some of the people living nearest to the church would provide shelter for as many of the horses as possible. At the congregational meeting, Andre Paulson was appointed to see that the brush be cleared away from the church and cemetery. Martinus Matheson and Paul Anker were appointed to fence the cemetery. It was fenced with 6-inch boards on the roadside and zigzag rail fences on the other sides. It was decided also in 1897 that confirmation pictures would be taken. On December 14th of 1899, the church was insured for $800 with Pennsylvania Fire Insurance Company of 510 Walnut Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. $700 was on the church and $100 insurance was on the furniture, fixtures, seats, bell, pictures, frames, and organ. And Eileen shared with me beforehand that if you, during the intermission, the certificate is hanging on the wall there if you so choose to come and take a look at that. In 1801, the Board of Trustees had land surveyed for the cemetery and security deed. This deed, signed by Peter and Thoreen Hansen, was granted on October 22nd, 1902. Peter Hansen was to receive $5 for this land, about 1 acre. The cemetery is located next to the church and evidently was the only cemetery in this vicinity as far back as 1873. There are quite a few non-members buried here. In fact, the very first person to be buried here was a non-member. A Catholic gentleman requested burial and the congregation granted his request. In 1904, the church inside was whitewashed. Then it was decided in 1905 that neighbors and outsiders could secure a place for burial in the church cemetery at a cost of $1 per grave. These graves were to be in the corner. It was also the year that the steel ceiling was purchased for the interior of the church. Also in 1905, some Ladies' Aid members thought it best to discontinue for a year or two. Pastor Berge told them to begin again and continue the good work. He suggested a more modern way of conducting meetings and the idea of having definite aims to work towards. In 1914, the minutes of the annual meeting held in October still read, "The committee in charge of the church shed project remain in office. John T. Lund, chairman of this project, was appointed to contact the Ladies' Aid with reference to financial aid. The Ladies' Aid purchased a lot 30 feet by 180 feet from Ole Cornelius on which to build a church shed. This was recorded on December 19, 1914, and signed by Ole Cornelius and wife, Ann Threen Hansen. Ladies' Aid paid $50 for the lot and also paid for the building of the shed, which amounted to approximately $500. In November of 1915, the annual meeting reported the building of the church shed. In 1916, the annual meeting reported that stall 1 was to be reserved for wood and that stall 2 was to be reserved for the pastor's horse. All of the pastors had served the congregation traveling by horse and buggy or cutter sleigh. In 1916, the congregation presented Pastor Bogie with his first automobile, a Model T Ford. Up to 1918, the records of the church had been maintained in Norwegian language. However, the business meetings were conducted in English for some time already. Hymns and scriptures readings from both languages were used. At this point in time, the congregation authorized Pastor Bogie to have English and Norwegian services at an alternating basis. Men and women parted when they entered the church proper, the men going to the right and the women and children to the left. In 1935, Pastor Blom, with the approval of the church council, recommended that families stay together in church. Gradually, the members became more accustomed to this new way and approved it. By 1929, the horse shed needed to be reshingled. Ladies' Aid once again paid for this. In 1932, it was decided to partition the horse shed and create a dining hall. Cost of the materials needed was $231, and the Ladies' Aid paid for these. In 1935, a used wood range was purchased for the hall, and Ladies' Aid paid for that as well. And just 2 years later, in 1937, the Ladies' Aid paid to have electricity installed in the dining hall. June 5th, 1960, Pentecost Day, marked the opening of the year of Jubilee for the United Synods of the American Lutheran Church. The new service book and hymnal and the new order of service was initiated. On November 4th, 1965, Pastor Westfall accepted a call to serve at Jerusalem Lutheran Church, Lunds. He was last full-time pastor here at Jerusalem. Pastor Roger Skatrud of Zion Lutheran Church served the congregation starting on February 5th, 1967 on an interim basis. The Jerusalem congregation had a listed membership of about 200 and Sunday school enrollment of 40. On Sunday, September 4th, 1968, the congregation's annual meeting, it was sadly decided to officially close this congregation as of April 1st, 1968, because we cannot obtain pastoral care from any known source. On May 12, 1968, about 80 members of the Jerusalem Lutheran Church joined Zion Lutheran Church in Shawano. Although closed since 1968, services are held at Jerusalem Lutheran Lunds 3 times each summer, and again on Christmas, pastor from Zion in Shawano officiates. The Jerusalem Cemetery Association and Auxiliary was formed and continues to maintain the church, cemetery, and hall. Since the closing of the church in 1968, the church roof was reshingled in 1988. In 1990, the steeple roof was shingled and white siding was put on the outside walls of the church. A light pole was erected and the hall roof repaired in 1991. 1993 saw a new water pump and pressure tank installed for the kitchen. Metal sheeting was installed on the west roof of the hall in 1996, and in 1998, metal ceiling in the church was painted by association members. They also painted the bell tower room. Over in the hall, they remodeled the kitchen, laid new baseboards, and repainted all the rooms. A new vinyl fence was also purchased. Auxiliary members installed that new fence. An old-fashioned family Christmas open house has been held here at Christmas time. Besides a Besides an historic Christmas program, it also features vintage Christmas decorations, holiday music, and caroling. And cookies and beverages are also served. This Jerusalem church was organized by a group of Norwegian immigrants with faith and family foremost in their thoughts. This was passed on through generations. Although the congregation endured closing in 1968, they remain strong and continue to maintain the church, cemetery, and dining hall so that they can stand united in their faith and family a few times each year. Thank you.
Hello there, my name is Lynn Merle, and I'm here to tell you today something about Riverside and Lunds in the township of Waukeshan. Waukeshan was known as a farming community. It was organized as a township January 25th, 1856, and was named after a Menominee Indian chief. Over the years, other townships formed and detached from what was originally Waukeshan. Some of the really early settlers of the town of Waukeshan have names consistent with some you'll hear today. Peterson, Matheson, Lund, Semple. The first white settlers to come to Riverside were James and Parlin Semple and Alfred Hammond. Alfred's wife, Jane, was a sister to James and Parlin. The Semple brothers and Hammond came down from Canada. They were loggers, and when they saw the great stands of virgin white pine here, they decided to go back to Canada, pack up their belongings, and come back to the town of Waukeshan to make their home. They returned to Wisconsin in 1853. And in 1856, the Semples had their house built, and Alfred and Jane were able to move into their new home shortly thereafter. It is believed that the first one-room schools in Waukeshan was Semple School, built in 1873. It was located on the south side of the first curve south of the Double C intersection. And I asked where that was, and they pointed that way. And then other schools throughout this township were Beyer, Dowman, Franklin, Porter, Rathforth, and Riverside School, which was in operation from 1913 to 1967. From 1843 to 1863, supplies and mail were transported via river travel. There were no roads built for travel. Some of the early settlers here in the Riverside Lunds area told of walking to Fort Howard, which is now Green Bay, and carrying some much needed supplies on their back or in bags, whatever worked. In 1863, the government laid out and built the old military road, which went from Appleton to Green Bay, over to Shawano, and up through the Menominee Indian Reservation and on to Ontonagon, Michigan. During this same time frame, the 1860s, a number of Norwegian families emigrated to America and came directly to the Waukeshan area. Most came to join family members that were already here. It was noted that they were like one large family because they seemed to be related, all of them. There was a close-knit community with their faith to bind them. Shawano County's population in 1869 was 3,166, and of that, 152 were Norwegians. They were people with a strong belief in their religion and a unique immigrant energy, ready to work hard and carve out a living in their new world wilderness. A distinguishing mark of the Norwegians was the closeness to their faith. Faith was central in their lives, and as Steve mentioned, their most valuable possessions were their Bibles, hymn books, and little catechisms. And their high regard for God's word led them to begin gathering for worship. One of the first, or the first Norwegian service in Shawano County was held on December 7th, 1869 by Pastor E.J. Hami. Some sources say it was Anton Peterson's home, and others, I believe Steve said, was at Martinez and Bertha Anderson's home. Whichever these gatherings at home prompted Plasterhami to help with the organizing of Norwegians into a congregation. In the 1870s, a stagecoach ran a route between Green Bay and Appleton. This road was referred to as the Old Tote Road. Later it was known as Shawano Road. The stagecoach hauled both passengers and mail. Because of the mail route, a post office was established here, Waukesha Post Office. It was located on the east side of the road at the intersection of County K and Triple C, which again they told me exactly. This is the area known as Riverside. On June 7th, 1870, Parlin Zempel became the first postmaster. As Riverside continued to grow, the Waukesha Post Office became the Riverside Post Office on September 27th, 1887. But this same type of growth, expansion of the area and services, was instrumental in the post office closing. A rural mail route out of Shawano meant there was no need for a post office in Riverside area anymore. It was discontinued on July 31st, 1908. In 1878, Alfred and Mary Chase saw the stagecoach line as an opportunity to build a farm and a dwelling to serve as a layover point for the stagecoach. There was plenty of layover room for both passengers and the horses. For many years now, that farm and home has been the Clifford and Eileen Ellertson home. Now a quiet intersection, Riverside once bustled. The railroad came through the township of Waukesha in 1884. The entire area saw great growth. In 1887, William Sexton built a store on the southwest corner in Riverside. He was there until 1893 when he sold to Calvin Sawyer. And here's a very interesting story what happened to a young boy in this area. On July 4th, 1887, a 10-year-old boy named Gustav Zamp was playing near his home and disappeared. A large number of volunteers searched for him and found only the little red wagon he had been playing with. However, what happened, a group of Indians traveling to Oneida found him and finding no other members or home, took him home with them and cared for him. In 1927, this 40-year mystery was solved. An Oneida Indian working at Morgan Siding in Red Springs ran into a guy who looked a lot like a man on the Oneida Reservation near Green Bay. So John Zamp went to Oneida to see this person who looked so much like him. He discovered his long-lost brother, Gustav, who now is called Aaron Denny. In a reunion, Mrs. Zamp made a positive identification of her boy from a scar he had when he was 4 and also a health problem that he had. It must have been quite a homecoming. Some other little stories. In 1898, Henry M. Peterson built his home and general store on the northwest corner in Riverside. Henry already had a very busy well drilling business, so Jetty, his wife, managed both the general store and the care of their 4 children. The Bondwell Telephone Company built their line in 1910 and attached it to the Peterson General Store. Besides being a market for produce sales, the store became a social center, and people would come into town, hitch their horse to one of the hitching posts in front of the store, and come in and visit. Then in 1913, the Riverside School was built, also on that corner. It closed in 1967, but it had averaged about 30 students a year while it was open. The old school was bought by Clifford Robley, torn down, and rebuilt into a beautiful family home. The first settlers, the Semples, decided that they did not want to be farmers and sold all of their property in 1904. Most of the land abstracts will show the Semples as first owners. The township of Waukesha went through many changes as it continued to grow. Johannes Lund, an immigrant from Norway, purchased land as it became available. What was once a bustling riverside now had to give way to vigorous growth in the area known as Lunds. Lunds in Norwegian means land. Some sad stories about health in those days. Health concerns in the early to mid-1890s had several families in turmoil. Clarence Tomaszek lost family members to a disease in 1894. In a 17-day span, the black diphtheria epidemic claimed 4 Tomaszek lives. And 2 years later, in 1896, Martinez Matheson and his wife Anna sadly lost their 3 sons and 1 daughter in about 3 weeks. As an infectious disease, it was so feared that deceased family members were removed from the house via the nearest window. Then in October of 1903, the worst storm ever to hit Shawano County came through. Riverside experienced considerable property damage. John and Petrona Pleshik, traveling quickly in their horse-drawn wagon to get out of the storm, were both killed by wind-blown debris. And I do not know if they are buried here or where they are buried. And fire tested the community on the nights of May 8th and 9th in 1916. A saloon, a store, and a cheese factory owned by Charles Tomaszek were destroyed on the 8th. With plenty of hard work still needed to clear away those buildings, fire struck again the next night. A saloon and dance hall owned by the Pleshiks were destroyed then. Strength of character and determination helped clear the debris, and within a short time a new dance hall had been built. And it was a round one, and the one in Bonneville is round as well. When the railroad came in 1916, a community called Lunds, and sometimes Lunds Corner, garnered the attention. The settlement was platted in 1920. 3 streets and an avenue were planned. Stores were added, and a new cheese factory was built by Herb Frey in 1928. Joseph Shue was the cheesemaker there for about 8 years. As Lunds continued its growth, Riverside began its slow journey to ghost town status. Today, Riverside is a rather quiet place to live. As you drive through the area, you can still see the old split rail fences built by the Semples and Hammonds. It has been said that they hired Indians to do the building over 100 years ago. So that is what I discovered when researching Riverside. But now Lunds. According to Wikipedia, Lunds is an unincorporated community located in the town of Waukesha, Shawano County, Wisconsin, USA, located along County Highway T and the Canadian National Railway, 6.5 miles southwest of Shawano. Now, knowing this, that Lunds or Lunds Corner was a site of new growth in the community while Riverside was starting its downward spiral and referred to the community that used to be, I would like to tell you what I found in researching Lunds. Not much. Really, not much. The first 3 references to Lunds said Lunds is an unincorporated and so on. That was it, the same thing for all 3. Now, if I had stopped looking after the first 3, I wouldn't have known much. Well, hardly anything. Nothing that would have told me anything about the people that first put it on the map. So if you don't mind, I'll tell you about the Lunds I really had to search for to find the interest. Some good, some not so good, but all more than just being unincorporated. Fred and Rose Knopf built a saloon, and they had a house moved in by a team of horses. They rolled it in on logs. That is growth. On August 8, 1946, the boiler at the Lunds Cheese Factory exploded. Mrs. Rose Erling Shue, age 48, was killed. That's very tragic. But her husband was found by Roland Peterson and Earl Babe Paulson. He had landed in the milk vat. If he hadn't been found so quickly, he very possibly might have drowned in milk. About half the structure was demolished and parts of the boiler were found a quarter mile away. Tragic, but also miraculous that he survived. The factory was later built with a new boiler that had been built in Clintonville and brought in from Clintonville. Nearby, at a tavern, 2 bottles of hard liquor and a clock were knocked to the floor by the force of the explosion. Also, the plaster on the ceiling cracked. Not sure how to label that, maybe just interesting, because they made a note of it and wrote it down. And now I'm telling you about it 71 years after it happened. And then I found this. In Lunds they had something called a shivaree. If a couple got married without a formal party or gathering, a shivaree was in order. Words would spread throughout the community, and usually just after sunset, crowds of people would converge on the newlyweds' dwelling. People would bring anything that was capable of making noise. For instance, someone might bring a 4-foot diameter saw blade on a steel pole, and others would beat on it with hammers, wrenches, anything that was hard and could be noisy. Seriously, empty 55-gallon barrels were also popular to beat on. There was no way that the newlyweds could sleep. When the noisy mob figured they had received enough money from the lovebirds, they would go to one of the town taverns and buy a pony, which is an 1/8 barrel of beer, or a doubleheader, a 1/4 barrel of beer. And I remember some of these things when I was very young. And according to the Herald Romastic, they made so much racket at one shivaree, the family dog took off and didn't come home for a week. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Another story about Pleshek's Pavilion. It was held up in broad daylight during the summer of 1946. While Sally Pleshek tended bar, the 2 masked men, one armed with a shotgun, robbed the tavern cash register and all of the customers in the bar too. Both men were caught, tried in court, and found guilty. Traumatic, at least for the Plesheks and their customers. In 1947, Wisconsin Public Service Corporation went through the township buying up easement for the 115,000 volt electrical transmission line between Green Bay and Wausau. Those with 40 acres or so were really smiling because they got paid for their land, which made them very happy. There were a lot of interesting facts about the Lunds area in Waukesha. I was glad I kept searching after the first 3 unincorporated stories. Round about 1937, Lunds had a store, a pickle factory, a potato plant, a cheese factory, and railroad station. Only the cheese factory remained in 1992. I learned that in August 1998, something that had been talked about for generations actually happened. Highway 29 bypassed the city of Shawano and went through the entire northern part of the Waukesha Township. I also learned that Vernon Cornelius, born 1912, died 1959. Harry Ellertson, born in 1896, died 1968. And James Lund, 1895, died in 1962, were some of the veterans buried in this cemetery. At the cemetery, I also saw the names of these veterans: James Kreischer, John Kuhl, Thomas Torson, and John Jack Urban. And I also learned that there were a few people that lived to be quite old. Sam Peterson lived to be 100 from 1866 to 1967. Melvin Paulson was also 100 from 1890 to 1990. And Anna Paulson Lund, born in 1896, died in 1998, lived to be 102. Anna lived in the community since she was 17, except for 2 years when her husband worked in Clintonville, and Anna made beautiful quilts. On July 19th, 1953, John Larson was struck and killed as he walked on the Sioux Line Railroad tracks. John lived in Lunds and was well liked. No one really knew what happened, but they did know that John was hearing impaired and that he was 83 years old. Again, tragic. When Andrew Mraz died on August 22nd, 1968, it was customary for the family members to dig the grave. While digging, son Joe found a tiny red oak tree that had just sprouted in the plot. Joe set the tree aside and planted it on the home farm. He put an old tractor tire around it to keep it safe from accidental running over from farm machinery. That tree, Dad's tree, is now over 30 feet tall and 16 inches in diameter and bears acorns nearly every year. And that tractor tire is still around it. And that's amazing. And then starting about 1960, cheesemaker Albert Giese, wife Mary Ann, and sons Alan and Dan were making about 1,500 pounds of good Wisconsin cheese each day. That much cheese required 15,000 pounds of milk per batch, which Albert got from 12 to 15 farmers. And Victor Lund, 1924 to 2012, after retiring, had decided to be the owner again of Lund's Bar, a place named after his grandfather Johannes Lund, and the place where about once a month, patrons would move the bar's 2 pool tables to the walls so that Cliff Ellertson could provide the music for the country western dancing that was going to take place. After a few years, Victor decided to close Lund's Bar. He started driving Shawano minivan and for the Shawano Leader, Deerco, and the Dialysis Center. He was a self-taught handyman and enjoyed helping others. And Victor, well, he was the son of Anna Paulson Lund, who made those beautiful quilts and lived to be 102 years old. By hanging in there, I actually learned a lot more about Lund's or Lund's Corner. So much more than it being an unincorporated village located in the town of Waukeshan along Highway T and southeast of Shawano. I thank you for listening, and I would like to thank Kathy Lachey, one of our board members, for doing the research for this. I found it very interesting, and I hope you did too. Thank you.
Welcome to Jerusalem Church, and welcome to Lund's. I was asked to tell you a little bit about Lund's, but I don't know if they meant the family or about the town, so I'm going to do a little of both. I'm Tolly Lund. I was born in 1823. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, about my brother Johannes, about my son John T., and my nephew, Johannes' son, John J. The reason it's me up here and not them is I do the short end of the straw. So let's begin. This area named Lund's. Probably reason for it being called Lund's, it's in my opinion, and a good Norwegian opinion is usually right. In 1917, the railroad was coming through this area. However, they just didn't come in 1917. They had to come much earlier to do the planning. So they came up through this area. I think they started someplace down around Appleton and moved through here. And I don't know if they went west from here or if they went to Shawano. But the point is, they wanted to have a stopping point at the crossroads that were down here. I think it was called Lund's Corner. Well, it was called Lund's Corner because my brother and his son owned a lot of the land around there. So why not call it Lund's Corner? So that's why it became Lund's. Good idea. Anyway, my father was Johann. And his first son, me, was Johannes. That was in May in 1823. And then in January of 1833 came another brother, Johannes. In 1852, I had a son and named him Johannes. And then I had another son in 1865 named Johannes. You're getting it. And my brother just had one son, and he was named Johannes. So without a second name, we would all be answering at the same time. So there is a Norwegian trait that often identified us by our middle name. At least that's true for my family. So I was called Tali. Tali, son. So now let me tell you a little bit about the naming of Norwegians. In Norway, our homeland, let's say if Hans had a son named Peter, and Peter would come to America, he would probably be called Peter Hans' son, or Peter Hans' son. So the same way if Johann named his son Peter, Peter came to America, he would probably be called Peter Johann's son. Likewise, if Peter were born in Beckland, Norway, like my kids were, when he left Norway and came to America, they would probably be called Peter from Lund or Peter Lund. Follow that? I know it's a little confusing, but anyway, you get the idea. Another Norwegian tradition. So now let me tell you a little bit about my family, our family. I'll tell you a little bit about Johannes, John J., his son, John T., my son, and myself. We were all born in Norway and came to America in 1868. The trip over was sometimes exciting and sometimes rather boring. We departed from Nes, Hedmark, Norway, on the SS Oder. The day was on June 12, 1868. My wife, Maria, came with us, as well as my brother's wife, Vivek. We traveled by water, probably to Quebec, and then followed down the river through the Great Lakes. I'm thinking that we came up then through Milwaukee, and there was a lot of water traffic there to the river, and we ended up at Neenah, and we walked across west from Neenah to maybe about 10 miles to a town called Winchester. And all along the way, we would stay with friends or relatives, especially at Winchester. There was quite a Norwegian settlement there. But it was quite a long walk. Well, we went to the land office in Oshkosh, and we were able to find some land that was available in the town of Waukesha. And so when we came up here, we were able to find a lot of, well, the land really wasn't cleared, it was full of trees. And so as immigrants, we usually found a lot of friends along the way, and we were able to stay there until we were able to establish a home, or whatever a homestead would be. And then we would clear the land, build whatever, the first building of course was a house, and then the other buildings for our animals. But as Norwegians, we value our faith and our family. We know that one man alone can get the job done, eventually, but working together forms the bonds that good communities are built upon. Then there was a group of Lutherans that gathered together to form a congregation, and we were there working with them. Johannes, my brother, had a home large enough, and if a home was large enough, it usually maybe had 3 rooms. But anyway, he had a home large enough for many of us to get together for worship. He became one of the first trustees for the new church here in Jerusalem, and I think it was about 1874, 1875, something like that, when the congregation was officially organized. Johannes' son, John J., was born in 1858, and he was about 10 years old when we came to America. My son was John T., Tali's son, Tali, and was born a little bit later, and he was about 3 years old. So, but both boys, as they were trained and grew up in this area, were very active in attending their church and in the faith. They were elected to many positions in the church later on. One of them was a secretary, one was a trustee position, and they assisted with the religious school, basic upkeep of the church, such as whitewashing in 1904, and seeking finances for other various projects such as the horse shed and dining hall. Now my son, John T., married a young lady named Juliana Olson. They had a family of 6 children. One of them was named Dewey. Now Dewey too was very active in the Jerusalem church. He later married a girl by the name of Nellie Olson. And there were many Olson families in this community. So even if his mother was an Olson, Nellie may have just been a distant relative. Anyway, Nellie's life as a youngster was rather rough. Her dad was Ole Olson, and he left the area as a teenager and went up to Hibbing, Minnesota to establish a homestead. Here he became involved with logging. He married a young lady up there, and then Nellie was born in that logging camp. Now, I don't really know the life of loggers, but her dad spent a whole lot of time with the men, and you can fill in the lines there is what they had. They had a merry time. Often Nellie and her mother were left home alone. Well, he did build them a house on the land, but he was away a lot. Well, Nellie's mother got acquainted with others too, and leaving oftentimes Nellie at home alone. But they finally got a divorce. Nellie's dad married again, and his second family came first. He decided to find a family to take Nellie in. Well, he finally found a cousin who said that they would raise Nellie because they had no children of their own. So now her foster parents were Sam and Alice Peterson, and Nellie was back here in Wisconsin. Sam and Alice never did adopt Nellie, but they were very kind to her. Alice taught her how to play the organ, Sam played the fiddle, Alice played the piano, and they would sing and entertain at parties and events. And Nellie eventually joined them. Well, Nellie met Dewey, my grandson, and they were married. Dewey and Nellie both loved the outdoors and spent much time roving over the land. Nellie had a favorite horse called Potsy that she rode everywhere, and Dewey loved trapping. He skinned and dried the pelts. One year he earned enough money to buy a phonograph. Dewey's mother talked Nellie into playing the organ for Jerusalem Church. Juliana, his mother, Dewey's mother, had played here for 30 years, and then Nellie was the organist for the next 20 years. Nellie went back to see her dad a couple of times when her children were growing up, but his second wife was not very happy to see her, and her mother really never wrote to her, so she gave up interest in seeing them. Well, getting back here, along with the farming, logging was very important. As we cleared the land and needed a place for all the trees to be processed. Now, Ioannis had quite a logging operation. John J., his son, had just the head to manage. During the winter, when the farming slowed down, then logging would be taken up, and John J. would hire a bunch of local men that needed employment. They surely had a successful logging enterprise going. Cut them down, skid them to the river, attach them to keep them corralled, and then float them down to Oshkosh for processing and selling. So John J. and his dad, Ioannis, kept buying acres of land. They finally ended up with several hundred acres, well, at least quite a few. Now, several of those acres of land were probably owned by someone else that needed the land cleared, and so they logged it for them. But anyway, John J. showed good common sense in his land management. John Jay also had the first cheese factory here in Waukesha Township. He kept very busy, but then things changed. John Jay was no longer able to keep running everything smoothly. The rumors were that John Jay had an argument with another logger, and it turned ugly. He got hit on the head with a cant hook by a man named Chase. John Jay did not come out the winner here. It's probably that his health problems began with this incident. Well, my brother Johannes had been trusting John Jay's business sense all this while. I don't even think he was expecting the sudden downturn. Johannes was living with John Jay and his family at this time. Now with John Jay, the son, in poor health, Christine was left, that was John Jay's wife, was left with the care of all, and that wasn't going well either. Gradually, neither Johannes and John Jay were working. Christine had to start selling off parcels of land. Elmer and Harry, their young teenage sons, were trying their best to manage the farm, but were not doing well. It was argued that with a little direction from Grandpa, Elmer and Harry might have succeeded with the farming. They were good boys, just a little young and inexperienced for the work that farming demanded. So for whatever reason, Christine did not want anybody to intervene. She was using the land and the animal transactions to rid herself of unneeded things. Christine gave 40 acres to me if I would take care of Johannes until he died. And to pay her bill at the general store, Christine did another land transaction. She gave 40 acres up to the store owner, Henry Peterson, to pay for the bills. After John Jay died, Christine moved to Marshfield. Now I do have a little bit of a story to tell you if you have time. Well, I know you've got time. I'm going to tell it anyway. One of John Jay's sons, name was Elmer, I told you that a little bit earlier. Elmer married Rasmus's and Alida Paulson's daughter, Annie. Well, Annie wanted to learn how to drive the car, but Elmer wasn't about to teach her. He told his family that she isn't going to learn from me. I don't want her behind the wheel because she's just going to run into everything. Well, one day, one of Elmer's brothers stopped by for a quick visit with Annie. He knew what Elmer was saying, but he said to Annie, "Annie, I heard you want to learn how to drive." "Yeah." "And Elmer says he's not going to teach you how to drive." "Yeah." So Annie says, "Well, I'm going to learn how to drive, but I'm not going to tell him." So then the brother pointed out there and he said, "Hey, here's the car." Since Elmer was not home, he was carpooled to work. He said, "Well, let's just take this little car out for a ride and I'll show you how to drive." So they took the car and they went out in the backfield and drove around a little bit, and Annie learned to drive a little bit more. Then the next day when Elmer went to work, Annie went out by herself with the car. Well, she got it into the field, but as those old cars sometimes have a notion to do, it stopped. And she just couldn't get it started. I think she flooded it. Well, it took her a while, but she finally got it going. And so she practiced, never saying a word to Elmer. Finally, one day, she decided to take the two kids and go to visit her mother. I guess her mother had quite a laugh when they drove up. That night at supper, the kids were telling Elmer about the visit with Grandma. Elmer says, "Well, was your grandma here today?" And the kids answered, "Oh no, we went up there." Not even suspecting, he says, "And how did you go?" And after finding out that they went by car, he had to ask, "Who drove?" Well, finally Annie had to break down and tell him that she had driven the car there. And what did Elmer have to say? "Boy, you're going to smash that car up yet." Well, like I said, it's a true story. Well, that's all I have for you. I told you a little bit about us, about most of the families around here. There's a bunch more of us. We do our best. We've been taught that faith and family are priorities, and that's just the way it is. Thank you. I just want to end a little bit with Tali's dad. Tali lived to be 86, and he's buried here in Jerusalem at Jerusalem Cemetery along with his brother Johannes and their sons John T. and John J. Not everything in my story was witnessed by Tali, because Tali died before some of the things happened that I told you, but to make the story complete, that's the way I related the story to you. However, everything in the Lund story is true. And I just like to know, is there any Lunds named here today? Anybody named Lunds? I think there's some relatives here, but I just wondered if there's any Lunds left in this area. My name is Marvin Klosterman, and thank you very much.
Welcome everybody here today, all my friends, neighbors, and relatives. And I know I have a few relatives here. I'll introduce myself. My name is Edward Andreas Olsen. I was born on February 13th, 1835 in Norway. I am the son of Ole C. Johansen and Berit Johanna Pedersdatter. Did you notice that my last name is not the same as my father's last name? The reason for that is Norwegian tradition. My last name of Olsen comes from my father's first name, Ole. I, being Ole's son, makes my last name Oleson. I was married twice in my lifetime. My first marriage took place in Norway during the year 1862. This marriage produced 2 children, both boys. Peter and Ole were their names. My first wife's name was Jacobine Pauline Engelbrecht's daughter, and she was born in Norway, as were our 2 children. We were farmers in Norway. My family, along with my brother Olivas, his wife Raquel, and their son Hardwick, emigrated to America. We arrived in Quebec, Canada on July 15, 1868. On July 12th, just 3 days before docking, my brother's wife Raquel had a daughter born at sea. They named her Elise, which is Alice in American, Julia. On December 24th, 1893, Alice married Sam Peterson. He was a well-known town of Waukesha resident. Sadly, my wife Jacobine died just a few days after ship docked in Quebec. She is buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Neenah, Wisconsin. Going from the excitement of a new country, a new life, there was great sadness. 2 very young children lost their mother. Circumstances led to Peter and Ole living with a nearby family by the name of Gibson. As a teen, early Ole heard that there were homesteads available out west. He decided that he needed a place to live, so he went west. That's when he went up to Hibbing, Minnesota. Our son Peter lived to be only 10 years of age. He got lost in the woods while it was raining and developed pneumonia. He is buried out here at Jerusalem, right out here. On November 10th, 1870, I married Johanna Karin Johansdatter, and we had 8 children. It was a house full. Ole had moved to Hibbing, Minnesota in 1893 and married Mary Bell. Together they had a daughter, Nellie Marie Olsen. After Nellie's parents divorced and around Nellie's 9th birthday, she moved to Sam and Alice Peterson's home, where they raised her until she married Dewey Lund. This is on September 29, 1921. Ole died on April 3rd, 1949, and is buried in the Chisholm, Minnesota cemetery. 3 of our sons moved to the west coast of the United States and kept the Norwegian spelling of our name, O-L-S-E-N. Also, our 2 daughters that stayed in Wisconsin kept the last name O-L-S-E-N. Our remaining sons that stayed in Wisconsin changed their last names O-L-S-E-N to O-L-S-O-N, a more popular Wisconsin name. My mother, Bereth, still in Norway, died on December 6, 1875. She was 68 years old. And my father, Ole, decided to immigrate to Wisconsin. He did that in May 1876. He was 77 years old. On February 22nd, 1880, my father passed away. He is buried here at Jerusalem Lutheran Cemetery right out here. Most of my life was spent farming in the town of Waukesha. On July 16, 1920, my wife Johanna died. Our son Julius took over the farm and set aside a couple acres of land to build me a home to retire on. I passed away on April 29, 1929, and my grandson, Alfred T. Olson, took over the home and raised 8 children in a small house. As of this year, 2017, I have 6 generations of Olson or Olson families living throughout the United States and Italy. And I notice out here, a lot of the descendants are here today. Right there's one, and there's one. Now, a little bit about Alfred Olson. Alfred T. Olson was born in the town of Waukesha on March 28, 1905. He was the son of Julius and Tora Olson. And on July 30th, 1925, he was united in marriage to the girl with the dimples, Mildred E. Haefs, the daughter of August W. Haefs and Annie Haefs from Galesburg, Wisconsin, which is now called Navarino. As a homemaker, Mildred was kept busy with 9 children. She had 5 boys and 4 girls. And to this day, there's only 3 boys and 1 girl still living. Alfred was employed by the 4-wheel drive in Clintonville for more than 30 years. He was a member of Jerusalem Lutheran Church in Lund, where he held the position of treasurer for a while. And after Jerusalem closed regular services, Alfred and Mildred became members of Zion in Shawano. Both Alfred and Mildred enjoyed snowmobiling and were charter members of the Lund Snowbirds. Alfred was one of the organizers and the first president of the club. It was the first chartered snowmobile club in the state of Wisconsin. Alfred enjoyed being outdoors. He enjoyed both hunting and fishing. Sometimes the fishing was illegal, but he still enjoyed it. He also loved playing cards and watching the Packers. Since 1970, he has been a member of Shawano Golden Agers. He and Mildred were married 72 years on their last anniversary. They had many occasions to celebrate. One of those being their 65th anniversary was memorable because they attended church that day with all 9 of their children and spouses there to celebrate with them. The children had placed flowers at the altar in honor of their parents' anniversary. And Cliff Ellerton played guitar and sang one day at a time for them, a very nice day. Alfred passed away on November 12th, 1997 at Shawano, funeral services were held at Zion Lutheran Church with Reverend Peter Sherwin officiating. Swedberg Funeral Home assisted the family with planning. Burial was in the Jerusalem Cemetery in Lawns. As of this day, they have 3 sons and 1 daughter still living. And in real life, I am Dwayne Olson, one of the sons. I'm 86 years old. I have a sister that's 90 years old that's in the nursing home. And I have 2 other brothers. One lives in Appleton and one lives in Bondwell. That's it. Gotta get my helper.
At this time, we're going to take a short intermission, maybe 10-15 minutes, and then get back so we can continue on. So there's cookies and lemonade back there, and I think water for sale, but hope there's some.
Paul Rasmussen. And today I want to tell you a little about my son, well, actually our son. I guess my wife also had a little to do with Rasmus too. He was our second eldest. Well, that might need a little explanation, but we'll deal with that later. I want to tell you about Rasmus because he was better known around here in Waukesha Township. I'm really proud of all my sons. When Elsa and I made the decision to come here to America in 1882, we wanted all of our sons to be here with us. We wanted all of them to stand here with dreams, to work hard, to feel proud of their achievements. I guess first, a little background is needed. Like I said, my name is Paul Rasmussen. Following the Norwegian tradition, my name came from my father. He was Rasmus Olsen. And of course, my name was Paul, but then I took the name Rasmus and son, Rasmussen, okay? I was born January 11th, 1830 on Bergen Farm, Open County, Norway. I'm the youngest of 5. I have 4 sisters, older than I. When my wife Elsa and I met, we dated. We both knew of people immigrating to America. We talked about the opportunities available. We decided that when the time was right, we would go too. Some might say we had a plan, but it was much more than that. With America always in our thoughts, we decided to start a family. Well, Jorgen Mikkel, or George Michael, as he was called here in America, was born in 1854. George always was a go-getter. He worked hard. He actually arrived before our wedding day. Elsa and I were married in Branoy Church on June 28, 1855. Our son Rasmus was born a year later, 1856. We had 2 more sons, Peter and Christian. A few years later, in 1866, we took in a foster child, Ida Erkstadter. We still talked about America. It was going to happen. It actually happened. Faster for Jorgen. In 1881, at age 27, Jorgen immigrated. Once in America, he went to Ashwaubenon, a place we knew others had gone and where assistance was available. A year later, in 1882, Elsa and I and our 3 sons finally went to America to join Jorgen. There was quite the celebration when we were all together again. In 1880, shortly before Jorgen was to leave for America, Rasmus and his wife, Nicoline, had a son born to them, Alfred Ricard. Baby Alfred was now 2 years old, and Rasmus and Nicoline made plans to wed in Fort Howard, and were expecting another child, a daughter, Thora, who was born October 15, 1882. Sadly, Nicoline died in childbirth. Rasmus lost his wife. He was now a widower with a young son and a daughter to care for. After a time, Rasmus made plans to marry Aletta Bertile Benjamsder. He had also decided to move with Aletta to Waukesha Township to be near other relatives. Baby Alfred remained in Ashwaubenon and lived with Elsa and I, his grandparents. 3 of our sons, Jorgen, Peter, and Kristen, and Elsa and I all homesteaded in Ashwaubenon. In Norway, I was listed as having an occupation of farmer and fisherman. Those things I was, but I was also a carpenter. The carpentry skills I had learned in Norway were useful here in America. My sons developed their carpentry skills working beside me. Rasmus had been working with me for several years, so his skills served him well in his new home in Waukesha. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that I was going to tell you about Rasmus because he was far better known around here. And I said that Rasmus and Aletta were getting married. This they did in 1886 and then settled themselves here in Waukesha Township. Here is where they raised their family. Rasmus and Aletta had 9 children, 2 sons and 7 daughters. In America, my sons went with the last name Paulson. Once again, following Norwegian teachings, my sons had their given first names and they were the sons of Paul, Bing. Therefore, Rasmus, Paul, sons, or Paulson. Now Rasmus was a good carpenter and a smart one. He would either buy a home and choose to remodel it or build from the ground up. Either way, he and Aletta would live in it for a few years and then sell it and move to another and do the same thing with that house. If someone needed a barn, he would build that. Rasmus believed in his community. Many an immigrant was helped by Rasmus. 9 kids would fill a house, but he and Aletta always had room for one more. Many stayed right there while Rasmus worked on building them a home. Ole Hogan, his wife, 3 of their girls, Nettie, Olga, and Julia, John and Ella Hogan, and Ella's mother, Rachel Ergens, and Verna, all lived by Rasmus when they first came to Norway. He helped all of them build their homes in the opening. Occasionally, Rasmus would go in with someone and purchase a grove of trees. Then he would get busy and cut logs and then skid them to the Wolf River banks. There they would be corralled and floated down to the mill in Oshkosh. They would all be cut into lumber, and Rasmus had a buyer right there for the lumber, like I said, smart. Now, I have been told, and I guess have witnessed it also, but they say Rasmus can be a little difficult on the side. You know, don't touch my tools, don't open my mail. I know his boys are doing a great job learning their carpentry from him. They tell me that they daren't touch any of his tools. Kind of makes me chuckle a little because I know that you can't do the job without tools. Rasmus knows it too. Eventually they work it out, but it just takes a bit of time. I know for sure those boys will have a greater respect for what isn't theirs. And I know one evening that I could almost read Aletta's mind. Rasmus was heading up the hill again. Ole Cornelius was having another one of his parties. His house was so big. Everyone just seemed to gather there. Aletta knows that was no place to take her babies. She just had to stay home with them as usual. Now, just thinking back a bit, I had said that Rasmus was the second eldest, but that it took just a little explanation. Elsa and I did have the 4 boys, with Rasmus being second. That was our family. But Elsa had a son several years before. Back in 1848, she had a little boy she had named Hans Johan Emaus Edvardsen. And I also had a son in 1852. Ole Christian was born in Fjord and lived with his mother. So I guess not complicated unless you are trying to put them all in chronological order. Now I know I had told you how proud I was of all my sons, and I am. But Rasmus did something that even I wished I could have been a part of. In 1891, the Jerusalem membership decided that the church was in need of a steeple and a chancel. It was time to do some of the finishing touches. Rasmus was able to build some of the tools needed right there inside the church. A fellow by the name of Alexander Johnson was there to help Rasmus. They built a turning lathe out of wood. It was inside the church, so they could keep on working no matter the weather. Together they turned out the communion rail, pulpit, baptismal font, and the altar. I can't imagine a lathe being made out of wood. Working indoors was better than fighting the elements. They decided to construct some scaffolding to assist on the steeple. Once they had the steeple up, they were able to continue work on it. It was also time to round the top of the windows and build a chancel. The church sure did look good when they were done. Well, now a really sad time. It was 1896, and Grandma Elsa and Grandpa Paul, me, well, we just felt blessed that Alfred was living with us. Wouldn't have gotten to see him grow up much if he had gone with his dad, Rasmus, and lived in Waukesha Township. But what a sad, sad day. Alfred was a smart lad, careful and always thinking. It was just an accident. Very unfortunate. Elsa was just distraught. Alfred had been killed accidentally by his own gun. How I did it, I just don't know, but it had to be done. I prepared a letter to be delivered to Rasmus. It was important that he knew that Alfred had died from a gun-shooting accident. Burial services would be taking place the following day. As was customary, the envelope was edged in black. I knew that when the envelope was seen, Rasmus would be on his way immediately. I didn't really think about the fact that Aletta would not open the letter because it was addressed to Rasmus. But however it worked out, the important thing was that Rasmus was there at his son's funeral. Aletta told me afterwards that she just couldn't open up that letter, but knew its importance. She was so relieved when Rasmus came home from town. Since he had gone in to get a piece of machinery fixed, she just didn't know how long he would be gone. She immediately laid out his clothes for him, and in no time he was on his way. Alfred is buried beside his mother, Nicolene, and his baby sister, Thora, in St. John's Cemetery, Brown County, Wisconsin. St. John's Cemetery is also where Elsa and I are buried. When we first came to America, it was with the intention of living in Ashwaubenon, Brown County. Our son Jordan was there, other relatives and friends. Peter and Kristen and their families all had homesteads there. It was our home. Rasmus and Loletta made Waukesha Township their home. When Rasmus died in 1990, he was laid to rest in his Jerusalem Church Cemetery. Rasmus was still a young man of 63 when he died. He had had an operation 5 years prior, but had never gotten entirely well after that. Cancer had set in his spine and bladder. Trouble was just too much to overcome. Rasmus had passed quite a legacy on to his sons. Once old enough to help, Rasmus had involved his boys in the carpentry trade. By working with their father and his teachings, Rudolph and Melvin became excellent carpenters. They both continued building homes and barns where needed. Rudolph also assisted with remodeling the Jerusalem Church horse shed into a dining room. Rudolph usually went by the name of Rob. Rob had been born September 3rd, 1889. He had moved to West Allis, Wisconsin, worked and raised a son, Arvie, and a daughter, Rowena. After retirement, Rob moved back to Shaman. On March 11, 1977, at the age of 88, Rob passed away. He is buried in West Allis at Highland Memorial Park. Melvin turned his expertise to clockmaking. He had married Stella Louise Olson, lived to 100 years of age, and was still busy making clocks when he was 98 years old. He and Stella are buried in the Jerusalem Cemetery here. I want to thank you for listening to my story. And the Paulson that I knew was Bernard Lee Paulson. That's Bob. And a lot of you probably knew Bob. And Bob was inducted in the Army in 1941 after serving in Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, and Central Europe. He was discharged in 1945. And 4 years later, he married his wife. On June 11, 1949, he and Dolores Goldie Lund were married here in Jerusalem. And there's Dolores right there. The altar in the church had been made by his grandfather, Rasmus. Dolores was the daughter of Dewey Lund and his wife Nellie. And Nellie's maiden name was Olson. Together, Buff and Dolores lived in 4 different states, spending 15 years out west. Buff was kept busy building churches. For several years, he worked for Shane S-C-S-H-O-E-N, Rock and Sons Company out of Oshkosh. Buff and Dolores had a daughter they named Gail Marie. After a number of years, they moved back to Wisconsin and lived predominantly in the Appleton area and in Shawano County. And they lived, well, let's see, there are a little more. Bob was a member of the Jerusalem Cemetery Association, Lund Snowbird Snowmobile Club, and the Shawano American Legion Post 117. He passed away on May 22, 2015, and was buried with military rites performed by the Legion he was a member of. He and Dolores had been married almost 66 years. And Bob is buried out here in the cemetery. Now about myself, I am not an original Jerusalem person. My mother and my stepfather are buried here, and they were members of Jerusalem. So consequently, now I am a member of the Jerusalem Cemetery Society. And I also have a son who is buried out here. But my stepfather was Clarence Peterson. And if you remember looking back on the screen, his mother and father were Henry and Jetty, and they had the Riverside Post Office and the store. And that's right over on the corner of K and Triple C. And that's how I came to be here.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story about the Petersons. And some of this stuff that I'm going to talk about has already been mentioned in some of these other things, so you'll just have to kind of bear with it. Samuel Albert Peterson was born in Winchester, Wisconsin on September 1st, 1866. He was the son of Norwegian immigrants Soren and Guri Hansen Peterson, and a brother to Henry and Louis. Many from Norway had come to America after receiving word that America was offering land for homesteads. The Winchester area, as well as the township of Waukesha and the Fort Howard area around Ashwaubenon, all received large groups of Norwegians. The Norwegian immigrants were very strong in their faith. The Bible was central to their lives, and as the number of immigrants increased, the necessity for larger places for them to gather also increased. Sam was baptized by Pastor E.J. Hami. Pastor Hami himself was an immigrant from Norway, and he was talked about earlier. His parents had brought him to America when he was 11 years old. He received his education here and then went on to seminary and then Concordia. He was an ordained Lutheran minister. Pastor Hamming went on to conduct his first Norwegian service in this parish on December 7th, 1869, and then assisted a group of Norwegian immigrants with organizing into a congregation in 1874. Sam was among those organizing the Scandinavian Evangelical Lutheran Church of Waukesha congregation. He became one of the charter members. Another of the charter members was Olavius Olsen. Olavius, his family, and 2 other families had come to America together on a sailing vessel. With most favorable winds, their journey was 14 weeks long. But Raquel, Olavius' wife, it was an extremely arduous journey. Being heavy with child, the days were long. 3 days before docking in Quebec, a baby girl was born. They named her Elise Julia. Because the baby was born closer to the U.S. soil than the Norwegian, baby Elise became a U.S. citizen upon birth. Olavius and his family settled in the township of Waukesha. He was there to help with the organization of Jerusalem also. This baby girl had now become a young lady. Elise, now called Alice in America, caught the eye of young Sam Peterson. Sam and Alice were married at the New Jerusalem Church on Christmas Eve, 1893, and Sam's brother Henry was his best man. They made their home in Waukesha Township, where they farmed for many years. Every so often, Sam would work in the woods for various contractors and cut timbers for them. Around about 1920, they moved to Lunds. Melvin Paulson was contracted to build their new home. Sam and John T. Lund built the barn behind the house. Sam began working on road construction. Automobiles were starting to make their way out of the showrooms. The few roadways that were available for auto travel were basic routes. Improvements were needed. Sam thought an automobile would have been a good thing to own. After one cold winter day, he had to walk all the way to a dentist north of Gresham to have a tooth pulled. The first car in Waukesha was owned by Henry Peterson, Sam's brother. Henry was the owner of a general store in Riverside and also a well driller by trade. Henry's car was a 1902 two-cylinder Cadillac. It was painted red and equipped with carbide headlamps, kerosene parking lamps, and steering gear mounted on the right side of the vehicle. It had leather seats, buggy-type top, and a bulb-type horn. It had only 2 shifts, a high and a low. The maximum speed was 25 miles an hour on good roads. Most of the roads were sandy, so occasionally while going uphill, the occupants would get out and help push. Sam knew that Henry had been chased off the main street in Shawano because the horses were afraid of the car. But that didn't stop him from getting a car when he retired. Roads kept improving and becoming more plentiful. Sam purchased a Ford touring car in about 1912, and he drove it fast. One particular time, they were taking a drive going to see Nellie and her husband Dewey. Sam was driving just like always, fast. When they pulled in at the house, he turned to Alice, and to his astonishment, she wasn't in the car with him. Alice had actually had her hand on the door latch, and when Sam made the turn, it was so abrupt that Alice was unable to grab onto anything as the door swung open, and she went flying. After that day, and when someone drove past Sam's place, they would slow way down because they knew Sam never looked to see if anyone was coming. They knew he was hard of hearing too. One time Sam got hit, and that ended his car driving. Sam and Alice had no children of their own, but fostered 2. Engwald Olsen of Milwaukee and Nellie Olsen, a young girl with area connections, and somebody told about her earlier. They adopted Engwald. Nellie remained their foster child. Nellie's father, Ole, and Alice were cousins. Both Sam and Alice loved music. They would hire out for some parties or events. Nellie learned to play the piano and was soon entertaining with them. Eventually, Nellie became the organist for Jerusalem Church here and played for 20 years. Sam served on the Navarino School Board for many years. While the Sandy Road School was still operational, many of the teachers throughout the years roomed and boarded at Sam and Alice's. Alice passed away in February 1955. A few years later, Sam went to live at Hami Home for the Aging in Wittenberg. Pastor Hami had founded Wittenberg and then had created a facility for orphan children and another for aged adults. When Sam was about to celebrate his 100th birthday, friends and family wanted to give him a special tribute. Open house was held at Jerusalem Church, with a birthday luncheon held here in the dining hall. Hami Home also paid tribute to Sam with an open house. Sam, probably one of the oldest residents of this part of the state, passed away April 15, 1967 at Hami Home in Wittenberg at the age of 100. Attendants at the home related that he had a most remarkable sunshiny disposition. Then I wanted to also touch on John George Peterson, and he was born on August 14, 1887 in the town of Waukesha, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Peter Peterson. On August 11, 1914, he married Ella Louise Lund, daughter of John J. and Christian Lund. Marriage took place here at Jerusalem Church in Lunds. John was a machinist by trade, working at the four-wheel drive in Clintonville until retirement. Ella's hobby was raising flowers. They had 6 children, 4 daughters and 2 sons: Margaret, Joyce, Arlene, June, Roland, and Eugene. Arlene became the wife of Curtis Grunwald, another member of Jerusalem. I want to thank you for your attention.
Jane Persona. Hi. My name. Jeg heter Ella Petrina Johansdatter Haugen, og jeg var født og oppvokst i Nord-Norge. Kan du snakke norsk? Nei? Så jeg må snakke på engelsk.
I can say oofda.
My name is Ella Petrina Johansdatter Haugen. I was born in 1872 and raised at Vassbotn Farm in Belfjord, Nordland County, Norway. I was the oldest of 3 children. I was baptized, confirmed, and married at Nausvik Church, the oldest wooden church in northern Norway. To the best of my knowledge, Belfjord was always home to my ancestors. I confirmed in 1887 on the same day as my future husband, Johan Rikard Ingebrigtsen. He lived at Haugen Farm and was the oldest of 6 children. In 1892, Johan and I were married. We lived with my parents, Rachel Benjamin's daughter, Johan Pedersen, and brothers Ulla and Johan Johansson at Vassbotn Farm for the first 5 years of our marriage. We welcomed our first child, Ergens Haugen, in 1895 while living with my parents at Vassbotn. My husband Johan's father died in 1897. Johan inherited the farm and split it into 2 parts, selling the upper part called Haugen Farm to my parents. My 2 brothers Ola and Johan moved to Haugen with my parents. Johan, Ergens, and I moved onto the lower farm we called Skade, near South Lake. My brother Ulla married Adolfina Steffensdatter in 1898 while living at Haugen Farm, where he managed our store. Ulla and Adolfina had their first child, Annetta Signora, later known as Nettie Haugen in America. Our second child, Verna, was born in 1899 at Haugen Farm. In 1902, Johan and I had our 3rd child, but he died in 1904 from bronchitis. Verna and Ian Ergens would be Johan's family. You may ask why we chose to move to America if we had a good life, a good farm, and a long history in Norway. My husband, Johan, and brother Ola might have told you America's sidewalks were paved in gold. But we had a history in our families of emigration from Norway too. I'm not sure when the plans became final, but I am sure that our parents' siblings, the aunts and uncles, and our cousins who settled in Waukesha and Navarino beginning in 1868 were a great influence on my husband's and brother's decisions to immigrate to America. My brother Ula was first to leave in 1905, and he escorted our second cousin, Olga Fredriksdatter, to America. She married Peter Christian Olsen, the son of a Jerusalem Lutheran Charter member, Jacob Norman Olsen, in 1907. My husband, John Ricard Haugen, planned to leave 1 year later. Oli's wife, Adolfina, and their 3 daughters, Nettie, Olga, and Julie Haugen, would follow Ola to America in August of 1906. Johan left Velfjord on September 20th, 1906 with his cousin's son, Peter Benjaminson Graven. Then late on October 15th, 1906, 3 days after their scheduled arrival, John and Peter finally landed in Ellis Island after enduring a massive storm on the ocean. According to the ship's manifest, Minneapolis, Minnesota was their final destination. I often spoke about my fear that I would never see John again. Only time would bring us back together. John stayed in Minneapolis with his cousin to work, but traveled back to Wisconsin in the spring of 1907, the same year that my father died in Norway. As the family story goes, he was chopping wood with my brother, Johan, in February. He sat down to eat his sandwich, but a part had frozen, and that piece lodged in his throat. While we were sure he choked to death, he also had a stroke at the same time, according to the doctor. His death made it necessary for my mother to sell the Haugen farm and store to the newlywed relatives. My youngest brother, Johan, had no inheritance, so he left for America in 1907 to go to Navarino, and our mother Raquel would go to America with Ergens, Verna, and I. While in Waukesha, my husband John lived with my mother's brother, Diedrich Benson, his wife Peternella, and their 7 children to help with the farming in the spring and harvest in the fall. Then John traveled to Argonne, Wisconsin, known as Crandon now, I hope I got that not backwards, to work as a lumberjack in the logging camp over the winter. Finally, he had earned the money to send for us and bring our family to America. We packed our belongings, silverware, plates, clothing, a spinning wheel, my mother's Bible, and her wind-up alarm clock. We were moving to a new land, but would rise to greet each day on time and praise God for our blessings. On August 8, 1908, we left Belfiord, never to return. And then we boarded the Canadian Pacific Line ship, the SS Empress of Britain, and sailed from Liverpool on August 22nd to arrive in Quebec, Canada on August 27th, 1908. So this is our anniversary for landing in North America. I was seasick for most of the trip, and Mother stayed with me. Verna and Ergens found the trip quite exciting until a wild wave hit the deck and knocked them over. They spent the rest of the trip with me. From Quebec, we took a boat through the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way to Chicago. Ergens spoke often of the St. Lawrence as a most beautiful sight. At Chicago, we boarded the train that would take us to Shawano, Wisconsin. Our Haugen family, my mother Raquel, the children, Ergens and Verna, and I finally reunited in September with John. John and I signed a deed for 40 acres of land in Navarino, Wisconsin on September 28, 1908. While John built our new home, we lived with my mother's younger sister, Aletta Benjaminson Paulson, and her husband, Rasmus Paulson, and their 9 children up in Waukesha at Riverside. It's a full house. Finally, our home was finished, and we moved in to start our new life in America, in a village called Navarino, reconnecting with familiar family and making new friends at the Jerusalem Lutheran Church at Lund's Corners in Waukesha. During 20 years on our Navarino farm, we saw both our children confirmed at Jerusalem Lutheran Church. In 1918, we sent our son to serve in World War I at Verdun, France. Our family became naturalized citizens in 1919 when Ergens returned from the war. Our daughter Verna moved to Appleton with her cousin Nettie Haugen, daughter of Ola and Adolfina Haugen. They worked first as laundress women for Lawrence University and then at the Conway Hotel as waitresses. Our son Ergens married in 1927 to Velbert Hazel Gunderson, who was the granddaughter of the first deacon and charter member Johann C. Olson, who was buried out here, and also the daughter of another Jerusalem deacon, Elder Gunderson. While one of our happiest notes was the birth of our first grandson in America, Clayton Hogan, we ended 1928 on a most sad note with the death of my mother, Raquel Benson Hogan. She kept our Norwegian heritage safe in her heart and most securely in our lives. I can't believe I'm crying. I would miss my mother and her courage most surely. And as family always is, there was so much more for which to be glad than just our family. Nettie Haugen was very involved with the Ladies' Aid Society, and where you saw Nettie, you saw Verna. Nettie was Verna's cousin, but they always seemed more like two sisters. They had a very special bond, first by family, then by their adventures at the Conway Hotel, and finally when they reunited back at the Jerusalem Lutheran Church. They were a blessing to our family and community. We often look back to where it all started in Norway, but our dear Nettie would be the only one to return to Norway one more time. After 20 years of farming and living our American dream, our son Ergens and his new wife Velbert purchased our farm and began their journey with their new family to live their American dream. Still, we were there to watch while Ergens and Velbert brought 4 more children into this world. Gertrude Hogan, born in 1929, twins, a girl and boy who were still born in 1931, and our last grandson, Eli Hogan, was born in 1932. We built a smaller house and barn on a piece of land just to the northeast of the original farmhouse. John continued helping with the farming, but took ill and died in 1943. Our daughter Verna had come home to help while John was sick, but after he died, she went back to work in Appleton, and I went with her. I was lonely for my Norwegian friends and family back in Navarino at the Jerusalem Lutheran Church, so Verna and I moved back to Navarino. In a short time, we moved our little house from Navarino into Shawano, where it still stands today on Maiden Lane. I passed away on June 9th, 1951. My daughter Verna married Joseph Shue, the cheesemaker in Lunds, in September of the same year. She had bought the home at Lunds Corners in 1950, so they lived there until they moved to Parkside Apartments in Shawano. My brother John Johnson married Olga Fredrickson Olsen in 1952 and eventually moved to Parkside too. Ergens and his wife Velberg stayed on the farm till 1964 when they moved to Seymour. On October 29, 1965, Ergens and Velberg sold the farmland to the State of Wisconsin Conservation Commission to become part of the Navarino Wildlife Area. Ergens died in 1966. He would be remembered as the farmer at the end of Town Line Road who drove the milk truck, loved his family, told a good story, and knew the importance of joy and laughter in one's life. Verna continued her activities with the Ladies' Aid Society of Jerusalem Lutheran Church. While at Parkside Apartments, she also volunteered as cashier in their cafeteria and fire marshal for the first floor in the building. She retired from cashier but continued as fire marshal until she turned 99 years old in 1998. While Verna never had any children of her own, her niece Gertrude and nephews Clayton and Eli loved and adored her, as did my many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She touched so many hearts in the little community of Waukeshan at the little church in Lunds Corners. She loved good gathering and loved to dance, and most certainly she loved a good joke. She loved to travel and loved Myron Florin, Lawrence Welk's Norwegian accordion player, who died 1 month and 1 week to the day before Verna died. And then Verna passed away August 30th, 2005 at 106 years old. Our beloved little Norwegian was gone forever from this earth, but never from our hearts. Change persona again. My name is Jane Rolland, and I am the daughter of Gertrude Hogan. She wanted to be here today, but has pneumonia. She wanted to extend her gratitude to all who made this day possible, to remember the ancestors who made all of us possible. God bless.
Hans Ludwig Ellertson and Mecca Geraldine Olsen. Hans and Mecca had 8 children: Ole, Elder, Conrad, Bertha, Inga, Jesse, Harry Melvin, and Jaeger. Hans Ludwig, Mecca, and son Ole immigrated from Norway in 1881. My name is Harry Ellertson. I was born right here in Navarino Township on June 30th, 1896. My parents were Hans and Mecca. My mother had been an Olsen prior to marrying my dad. They had gotten married over in their homeland of Norway. They came to America in 1881 on a ship called City of Chester. I am just one of their 11 children. On June 21st, 1930, I married Annette Haugen in this church, Jerusalem. She always went by Nettie though, not Annette. Nettie was also born over in Norway. To be precise, Norland, Norway on March 23, 1899. She came to America in 1906 with her mother Adolphine and 2 sisters, Olga and Judy. They came over on the SS Empress of Ireland. Her father, Ole, had come to America the previous year, 1905. He was on the SS Lake Champlain. Nettie said it had been a long year without Daddy, so they were really excited when they finally were united on August 15, 1906. Since I was born here, I started working as soon as I could. I farmed, I logged, I even worked for WPA. Then I made cheese, which was a good job, so I became a cheesemaker in Livingston, Wisconsin for several years. That's where our sons were born. Dale Rodney was our first baby. He was born in 1931, but only lived for a few days. We were really heartbroken. After months of anticipation, that's a hard loss. We packed lots of love into those few days. Then Harold was born in 1932, Clifford in 1933, and Doug in 1935. We returned to the Shawano area in 1942 and later brought the Chase Farm. If you remember, the Chase Farm used to be a stagecoach stop-off inn. That was when the mail traveled by stagecoach right along with any passengers. Well, the boys grew up and all got married. Harold married Sarah Bain, Clifford Eileen Matheson, and Doug Shirley Melberg. In April 1959, Nettie and I moved to a house about a mile from the farm. Clifford and Eileen were planning to move on the farm after their wedding. Harry passed away on July 8, 1968. Nettie moved into an apartment at Parkside in Shawano. She was able to enjoy some of her grandchildren. Then on Christmas Eve, 1982, Nettie also died. They are buried here in Jerusalem. On November 8, 1959, Clifford and Eileen were married. Like their parents and their grandparents, they were married here at Jerusalem. But unlike those before them, the wedding ceremony itself caused a lot of stories to be written. Number 1, the only wedding known to have all the bridal party at the altar with no pastor even in the building. And number 2, the only wedding where the organist played "Oh Perfect Love" over and over and over. Apparently, a lot of whispering was going on out among the seated guests. A lot of thoughts were voiced about the reasons for the delay. Finally, the pastor arrived, and the ceremony went on without any other problems. Simple answer, he had hit a deer on his way to the church. Mabel Prestud said afterwards that she had never played "Oh Perfect Love" so many times before, not even when practicing. Cliff and Eileen had 5 children, all boys. Stephen, 1959, Timothy, 1961, Daniel, 1964, Rodney, 1968, and Aaron, 1970. Steve went 3 years to the same Riverside school that his dad and uncles had gone to. It was located just across the road. Then the school closed for good, and the land it was on was sold. Cliff farmed and built onto the barn a couple times, making it larger. He doubled the acreage, and in the 70s, added on to their home. Eileen has now lived over 58 years on the farm. Son Danny, born in 1964, had health problems soon after he was born. He would just stop breathing. Since there were no monitors yet, he had to be watched at all times, night and day. And as he grew, he always needed complete care. But those eyes of his, they were always so bright and caring. To his family and friends, Danny was an inspiration. From him, they learned that words are not always important. Danny didn't speak, but the love he gave to all was unconditional. He was a joy. Danny was born on March 11, 1964, and died December 11, 1979. He was only 15. When he died, it was very unexpected. Eileen was holding him in her arms. He was looking at her with those beautiful eyes, and then suddenly, he was just gone. A short time after Danny's death, Eileen found a very appropriate poster. When love is great, there is no need for words, for even in silence, love is heard. In 1977, Cliff had the opportunity to go to Nashville and record a couple songs that he had written. One of the songs, the Packer Hall of Fame, actually became a part of the memorabilia that has been collected by the Green Bay Packers for the Packer Hall of Fame. The other song, On the Feet of Me, has a few stories itself. First off, Cliff had said that the song was inspired by a couples club that he and Eileen were part of. At one of the club's meetings held at Zion Lutheran in Shawano, Cliff was preparing to sing that song for them. He had gotten his first leisure suit for the occasion and then realized he didn't have any shoes to wear with it. A few of the members helped him out by painting a pair of his old barn shoes white, and then decorated them too. Leisure suits somehow made white shoes popular. Cliff wore those shoes in church when he sang that song for them, and he wore them again when the club held a barn dance at one of the barn remodels. Another occasion where Cliff took off his farming hat and put on his cowboy hat was when he participated in the local CP telethon twice. He had written a special song for his son Danny and performed it for all to hear. And we do have a copy of that, and we're hoping to play it after the program is all finished. Some other performances that were especially meaningful for Cliff and Eileen were when he would play and sing with his grandchildren or great-grandchildren. They performed with Grandpa Cliff at many events over the years since about 1987-88. Several of those years, you could catch their performance at Shawano Folk Music Fest. Cliff and Eileen's first granddaughter, Tanya, joined voices with a very proud grandpa at one festival, and for years after, he was joined in song by several of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Ellertson farm has always been a busy place. Eileen's father, Alman Matheson, lived with them for 20 years, and Eileen and Cliff cared for adult foster men since 1977. Eileen says that her home has never been fancy, but it has always been filled with family and friends. Although day-to-day life was in constant motion, Cliff knew how to bring a calmness for those around him through music. Cliff loved playing guitar and singing. Lucky were the men who helped whenever the barn or silo was under construction, or when the house was getting an update. Eileen would cook delicious meals for them, and then Cliff would play and sing. No one ever complained when mealtime or break time was extended with a little musical entertainment. That was life on the Ellertson farm. Weekends usually had visitors. Many were the times that friends from Milwaukee were there. Eileen knew to always prepare more than was needed because it was better to be prepared. Nothing was wasted. Talking with Eileen, it was very easy to see that faith was very important to her and Cliff. Each night before sleep, they prayed together. Cliff passed away this past February 28th. The little church that played such a huge part in their lives had been the setting at weddings for Ellertson grandparents, parents, 3 sons, and a granddaughter. Like the many Norwegian immigrants that gathered together in the late 1800s, faith and family are important. Eileen wants everyone to know, in her words, life goes on, we are blessed. And I am Renee Ellertson,